I'm Trevor Stevenson, and welcome to Your Story Will Be Different. This is a narrative play podcast where I tell you the story that comes to be from a playthrough of a solo tabletop role-playing game. For this session, we're playing Dragon Dowser by Hatchlings Games, in which you are a Dowser in the solarpunk world where dragons are being hunted by an oppressive regime because of their mystical powers. It's a solo journaling tabletop role-playing game that's very immersive and very fantastical. I had a blast playing it, and with that said, let's dive right in. Gabanyi woke with the muted hum of Praelar's poisoned winds rattling against the metal panes of the Dowser outpost. Before anyone currently alive could remember, this land had been vibrant with forests and rivers. Now it was a barren expanse, pockmarked with skeletal machines which were remnants of the old world. The spore storms had scarred everything: the earth, the sky, and the hopes of mankind. Gabanyi's gaze lingered on the far horizon where faint plumes of green-tinged clouds swirled ominously. But beyond that, nestled in the crags of the Dawnreach Mountains, he thought of the hidden sanctuary where dragon eggs were kept safe. Gabanyi had spent years as a Dowser doing what he could for the cause, but had only glimpsed the hatchlings from a distance. It was not his role, but the older Dowsers spoke of their ethereal beauty, of their power to heal both land and soul. History tells that when the dragons first emerged, they brought salvation. Their unhatched eggs emitted a clean, potent energy that revitalized the machines of an almost forgotten era. These machines cleared the air, purified water, and even pushed back the deadly spore storms. Praelar had begun to heal. The Mecharchs, Praelar's ruling elite, had uncovered a darker truth. The yolk of the dragon eggs held an even greater power, capable of fueling weapons of unimaginable destruction. Greed and fear drove the Mecharchs to command the machines to hunt the very creatures that had saved them. The dragons were slaughtered, their eggs stolen, and the fragile peace shattered. The spore storms, as if in mourning, returned with greater fury. Gabanyi's parents had been among the first to join the Dowsers a generation ago. At the time, they had only been doing what they believed was the right thing. They believed in a future where dragons and humans could coexist, and the land would be allowed to recover in time. But his parents were labeled as insurrectionists and hunted. When the Mecharchs' machines finally found and raided their settlement, Gabanyi had barely escaped with his life, clutching a single last egg wrapped in a protective cloth. It was that day that Gabanyi swore to take up his parents' mission. A handful of decades later, after losing friends and allies to the Mecharchs, Gabanyi was a leader among the Dowsers. They looked to him to coordinate daring raids against the draconian regime of Praelar. Today's mission was the most dangerous yet. Infiltrate a Mecharch bastion to rescue a clutch of eggs rumored to be held there. The stronghold was heavily fortified, and the soldiers had a history of killing intruders on sight. But if the rumors were true, the eggs inside represented the last hope, beginning to reverse the damage the Mecharchs had wrought. Gabanyi tightened the straps on his armor and glanced at the slapdash infiltration team circled around him. They were ordinary people. Farmers, mechanics, teachers. Pushed too far and brought together by the shared belief that Praelar's future is in the dragons themselves. As the group moved out, Gabanyi's thoughts lingered on the egg hidden in the outpost's vault. It had been years since it had been retrieved, but it still pulsed faintly with life. He had named it Shalith, which he understood was an ancient word meaning rebirth. As they approached the Mecharch repository, the spore-laden air forced them to wear filtration masks, and the ground was littered with mines, both mechanical and fungal. Gabanyi's heart pounded so hard he was almost convinced it would somehow alert the sentries. The success of the mission would determine more than just their survival. It could begin to tip the scales in the fight against the Mecharchs. After slipping inside, the sight took Gabanyi's breath away. Arranged in containment pods, dozens of eggs, each of their translucent shells were glowing softly. It was both beautiful and horrifying. In his mind, each egg represented life and hope, yet they were imprisoned and their potential exploited for destruction. As the team began extracting the eggs, alarms immediately blared. The Mecharch's enforcements descended upon them, men and machines bristling with weapons. "Go!" one of them shouted, covering Gabanyi as he carried the last egg out of the vault. "Protect them!" His conscience screamed at him to look back and help his fellow Dowsers, but Gabanyi didn't stop until he reached the extraction point. As the transport ascended into the toxic sky, he looked down at the citadel, which was now bustling like a kicked ant colony. It was a small, hollow victory. They had only saved a couple of eggs, but the losses from the squad had been substantial, and the Mecharchs would barely notice any operational changes. He placed the rescued eggs alongside Shalith at the sanctuary. The elder Dowsers there began the careful process of nurturing them, using techniques that had been passed down from previous generations. As he stepped out of the nursery, Gabanyi was promptly escorted to the meditation chamber of one of the most reclusive Dowsers. Ellie was known for her prophetic visions and dreams, though Gabanyi was still uncertain of her so-called mysticism. All of her visions had been for the other Dowsers, and had led some of them to their deaths. He entered the dimly lit chamber, noticing the scent of burning herbs swirling around him in ethereal spirals. Ellie sat cross-legged in the center of the room. Her blindfold was an embroidered cloth marked with ancient runes. It covered her eyes, but she turned to him as if she could see every step.
"You've come."
She beckoned him forward. Gabanyi hesitated, but then knelt before her. Ellie reached out. Her fingers brushed against his brow.
"Close your eyes, Gabanyi."
After a moment, he complied. Darkness folded around him, but then immediately fractured, replaced by a blinding glow. He stood in a vast, barren landscape. The ground was cracked, pulsing with veins of molten light. The sky churned with storm clouds, heavy with toxic spores, their green wisps writhing like serpents in the air. In the distance, a lone dragon egg sat atop a jagged peak of obsidian, encircled by spiraling flames. The egg glowed with a mystical sheen. Veins of fire pulsed across its surface. Gabanyi felt its warmth and weight in his hands, though he had not touched it. The air around the peak was alive with whispers, voices of the past, the cries of hatchlings long gone, and the reverberating roars of their ancestors. But another sound grew. The grinding of gears, the relentless march of machines. A battalion of Mecharch constructs advanced. Their eyes glowed with a soulless red light focused on the egg. Above the constructs, metallic drones swarmed like locusts. He watched helplessly as the machines closed in. The egg's glow intensified, a heartbeat of fire, but it remained vulnerable and alone. Suddenly, a shadow moved between the machines and the egg. A dragon, immense and ancient. Its wings spread wide to shield the fragile life beneath it. The dragon's body shimmered with scales that seemed forged from twilight itself, but its wings bore the wounds of countless battles. Ellie's voice broke into the vision, whispering like the winds of a storm.
"The last guardian. She has waited for too long. The flames protect, but they also consume. If the egg is lost, the land will burn in mourning. If it is saved, there may yet be rebirth.
The dragon released a torrent of fire, its roar shaking the very fabric of the vision. The flames engulfed the advancing machines, but countless more took their place. And then the vision shifted again. He now stood within a desolate village. The sky above was darkened and the ruins smoldered. But amidst the devastation, a young dragon, small, frightened, but alive, huddled beneath the remnants of a collapsed structure. Gabanyi's breath caught as he saw himself approach the creature. His whispered words he couldn't hear. To seek the egg is to walk through fire. To guide the young one is to mend the bond that was broken. The ground beneath his feet quaked and the sky began to splinter with light. The pieces of the vision fractured and reformed one final time. Now, he saw himself atop the volcanic peak, the obsidian egg cradled in his arms. The dragon guardian lay still beside him, her body broken, yet serene in death. From the horizon, another storm advanced, but behind him, hatchlings began to arise. Small, shimmering forms that climbed from nests hidden beneath the ashes. Gabanyi woke with a gasp, his heart pounding in his chest. Ellie's hand rested lightly on his shoulders. At last your path reveals itself to me, and now to you. The obsidian egg waits in the heart of the fire, but your quest is not merely to recover it. You must ensure its guardian's sacrifice is not in vain. He understood now. His mission was more than just another raid or a rescue. It was a reckoning, a chance to restore what the world had forgotten. I will not fail. Ellie nodded, the ghost of a smile on her lips. No, you will not. But remember, the greatest trials are not faced with steel alone. As he stepped out from the chamber into the dawn's cold embrace, the winds of Pralar whispered through the outpost's walls, but they no longer carried only despair. Somewhere, far away at the edge of the Dawnreach Mountains, fire awaited. And with it, the spark of hope. The first dragon Gabanyi encountered on his journey to find the egg set the tone for his quest. The female summer dragon watched intently as he worked, her golden eyes narrowed with suspicion and a trace of curiosity. Using salvage machine parts, scavenged from an old factory nearby, Gabanyi painstakingly constructed a makeshift incubator. Each part had to be cleaned and tested, ensuring it would emit the right amount of warmth without overloading or malfunctioning. As he worked, the dragon's massive wings shifted restlessly, stirring up the dust and pollen that clung to the barren ground. When the incubator hummed to life, its soft, steady warmth radiated outward. The dragon lowered her head and emitted a low trill of approval. She studied him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, before spreading her wings and soaring into the sky. He watched her disappear over the horizon, and the egg she had entrusted him with, now resting safely within the incubator's protective embrace. Hours later, just as the sun dipped below the jagged skyline, she returned. Her claws were laden with gifts, a variety of bright, sweet-smelling fruits and a bundle of medicinal herbs he recognized from his training. These were not just gifts, they were tools for survival. The fruits would nourish him, and the herbs would be used to treat wounds or illnesses. It was as if she understood the challenges he was going to face and sought to ease his trek in her own way. Her gratitude was clear, and in that moment, a bond of mutual respect was formed. As she settled near the incubator, she curled protectively around it, a fully grown dragon had placed her unborn young in Gabanyi's care, a fragile human in a world that had betrayed her kind. Damara arrived just as the evening sun cast long shadows across the Dowser's outpost entrance. She was unlike any Dowser he had ever met before. Her presence was magnetic, a quiet confidence that radiated from her that seemed to calm even the most agitated of dragons. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back into a loose braid, and her hands bore the calluses of someone who had worked tirelessly in harsh conditions. But her eyes, a deep, verdant green that held the most striking feature, a glint of understanding that seemed to bridge the gap between humans and dragons. Her affinity with hatchlings became apparent almost immediately. One of the hatchlings, barely a day old, chirped softly and stumbled toward her. Damara knelt and extended her hand. The hatchling nuzzled against her palm, its tiny scales shimmering in the fading light. She carried an unspoken language, a connection that required no words.
I've always felt close to them.
She explained later that evening as they shared a meal.
Even before I joined the Dowsers, the dragons, they'd come to me, like they knew I could help.
Over the coming days, Damara proved invaluable. She taught them techniques to soothe distressed hatchlings. Her methods were instinctive and precise. She could sense when an egg needed more warmth or when a hatchling's cries indicated hunger or discomfort. It wasn't just knowledge, it was a gift, one that seemed to transcend the boundaries between species. The other Dowsers began to look to her for guidance, even the elders, and her presence became a beacon of hope and reassurance. Damara's arrival was a reminder that the fight wasn't just about survival. It was about rebuilding the bond between humans and dragons, something as natural, for some, as the setting sun. The swamp stretched out before Gabanyi like a festering wound. Its surface was a patchwork of sickly green and murky browns. Even the air seemed thick with decay. The stench of rotting vegetation mingled with an acrid metallic tang. His guide was an aging, obsolete Mech-Arc Walker unit he'd nicknamed Old Stomp. It led the way, its mechanical legs creaking with each step. It wasn't fast, but it was reliable, its sensors scanning for traps and hazards hidden beneath the muck. For hours, he had trudged in its wake, the swamp's oppressive atmosphere becoming heavier with every passing moment. Suddenly, Old Stomp froze. Its sensors emitted a sharp, high-pitched whine. Before he could react, a massive shape erupted from the murk. Water and sludge sprayed in all directions. The creature was a grotesque fusion of flesh and fungal growth, its body riddled with spore-filled sacs that pulsed ominously. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, filled with a predatory intelligence. With a deafening roar, it lunged at Old Stomp, its claws tearing into the walker's metal frame. Sparks flew as the machine struggled to break free, its servos straining against the creature's immense strength.
Fall back.
But even as Gabanyi scrambled to safety, he couldn't take his eyes off the battle. Old Stomp's mechanical limbs flailed desperately, its antique weapon systems firing bursts of energies that barely seemed to faze the creature. Then, with a final, shuddering groan, Old Stomp was dragged beneath the swamp's surface, the murk closing over it like a grave. For a moment, silence reigned. It was only broken by the distant calls of swamp-dwelling creatures. Climbing over a boulder one day, Gabanyi's dowsing crystal swung wide on its leather necklace and cracked unexpectedly against the rock face. Its soft blue glow flickered weakly before fading out. The artifact had been a lifeline, guiding Gabanyi through treacherous terrain and through the deep hidden places within Pralar's ruins. Now, a jagged fracture ran through its heart, rendering it useless. Without the crystal, locating any dragon eggs would be near impossible. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Gabanyi took a detour and sought out Ilarith, a skilled artisan residing on the outskirts of a Dowser way station. Once a Mecharch engineer, Ilarith had defected to the Dowsers, bringing her expertise in repurposing intricate machinery and weaponry to their cause. If anyone could repair this fragile crystal, it was her. Ilarith's workshop was more shed than warehouse. Sparks flew as she worked on a project, and her sharp features were illuminated by the glow of a welding torch. When Gabanyi presented the damaged crystal, she examined it with a very practiced eye, and her expression grew gravely serious.
A cracked crystal. This won't be a simple fix.
Ilarith placed the crystal on her workbench, tapping it lightly as if to gauge its stability.
To stabilize the fracture, I'll need a vial of dragon yolk.
He felt burning flash through him. Dragon yolk was an invaluable resource, vital for nurturing eggs and healing hatchlings. Parting with even a single vial felt like a betrayal to the Dowser's mission.
I have some on hand after recovering one of the Dowsers that fell during the last Mecharch armory raid. But for the sake of transparency, I wanted to let you know what was necessary.
After a moment of hesitation, Gabanyi nodded. The crystal was too important to lose. Ilarith worked through the night. Her tools buzzed and clicked as she delicately mended the artifact. Her tenacity was unrivaled, and he now understood why so many of the Dowser sought her out. By dawn, the crystal was whole again, its light restored to a steady, reassuring glow. As he set out on his quest once again, Ilarith gave him a warning.
This fix is not a permanent solution. When possible, I'd suggest you keep an eye out for a replacement.
He thanked her again and set out into the wilderness. The Winter Dragon's lair was carved into the side of an icy mountain. Whether by time or by the dragon herself, Gabanyi wasn't sure. Its entrance was concealed behind a frozen waterfall that he had stumbled upon during a blizzard. His strength was waning as the storm raged around him. The biting wind and swirling snow were enough that he feared he might collapse before finding shelter. The frozen veil parted to reveal the dragon's respite. Inside, the lair glimmered with ethereal beauty. Icicles hung like crystalline daggers from the ceiling, and the walls were coated in a frost that shimmered in hues of blue and white. Pools of thermal water steamed gently, making the atmosphere almost cozy. Gabanyi hesitated at the entrance, unsure whether he was welcome. A deep rumble echoed through the cavern, and the winter dragon emerged from the shadows. Her scales gleamed like polished silver, her eyes, as cold and sharp as glacial ice, locked onto Gabanyi. The muscles underneath her scales belied the behemoth size of the dragon, but her gray-blue eyes had a wisdom in her gaze. To earn her trust, Gabanyi knelt and slowly removed his pack. From within, he retrieved a bundle of dried herbs and fruit carefully wrapped in cloth. He laid the offerings at the dragon's feet, bowing his head in a gesture of respect. The dragon sniffed the bundle, her frosty breath condensing in the air, and let out a low, approving trill. She stepped aside, allowing Gabanyi to enter fully. The warmth of the lair enveloped him, and he sank to the ground, exhausted but grateful. He spent 2 days as the blizzard raged on outside. He rested, tended to his wounds, and he occasionally caught glimpses of the dragon tending to her own small hoard of treasure and eggs. When the storm finally subsided, the dragon approached Gabanyi with a bundle of supplies: dried meats, pelts, and a small flask of glacial water. It was her way of ensuring he would survive the journey ahead. He bowed his head deeply. As he stepped back into the thawing wilderness, he carried a new reminder of the fragile alliance that could help those in extreme environments. The Autumn Dragon's crystal was unlike anything Gabanyi had ever seen. It shimmered with an amber hue, flecks of gold and red swirling. It had been a gift from a mother Autumn Dragon who entrusted Gabanyi with this relic of her lineage. The dragon had approached him one evening just outside the light of his campfire. She placed the crystal at Gabanyi's feet with a soft, rumbling sound that resonated within his chest. When he first held the crystal, a warmth spread through his palms and up his arms, settling into his core. He knew that this would be different than the crystal he had before. It seemed to pulse faintly, matching the rhythm of his own heartbeat, as though it were attuning itself to him. It felt alive. He soon realized the crystal was able to feel subtle vibrations in the earth and detect the faintest trace of dragon energy. When he turned to say thank you to the dragon, he found that he was alone. Gabanyi encountered the Mekark deserter on a narrow mountain pass. At first, he wasn't sure if it was a man or woman because of the mask they were wearing. They sized each other up. The deserter's ragged uniform was a clear indication of their origins. Upon closer inspection, Gabanyi saw the telltale insignia of the Mekark elite, now faded and defaced with claw marks. But he knew even deserters were a danger to Dowsers.
Not often you see one of us on this side of the line.
He introduced himself and said his name was Chiron. Tensions eased, and the Dowser offered the deserter some of his food. Chiron's reasons for defecting came out over a shared meal by a small fire.
I saw what they were doing to the dragons. It wasn't our destiny. It wasn't even utility. It was slaughter. Plain and simple.
Chiron explained that he had been an engineer, tasked with maintaining the war machines. He had witnessed firsthand the brutality inflicted upon the dragons. The eggs that were harvested, their nests were raised. One day, a hatchling had been captured, and something about its screams of terror shook him to his core. There was something about this hatchling that was unlike any of the others he had caught before. Chiron had defied orders and set it free, and he was lucky to escape with his life. From that moment on, he knew there was no going back. Gabanyi listened intently, weighing Chiron's words with a trepidatious sympathy. Chiron had useful skills, deep understanding of Mekark technology, and the ability to dismantle all kinds of Mekark machines. But Gabanyi's trust still needed to be earned, as he could count on one hand the number of deserters that didn't turn out to be Mekark spies. Still, his actions spoke louder than words. The deserter carried a small, makeshift pouch of dragon scales and feathers, keepsakes from the creatures he had managed to save. Supposedly. But as they journeyed together, Chiron proved invaluable. He disabled a Mekark drone that had been tailing the two of them. He shared insights into the enemy's strategies and weaknesses, knowledge that could turn the tide for the Dowsers. And slowly, a camaraderie began to form, built on shared goals and mutual respect. By the time they reached the next outpost, Gabanyi no longer saw Chiron as a deserter, but as an ally. He was a reminder that even within the ranks of the enemy, there were those who would choose a different path. As they parted ways, Chiron gave Gabanyi a parting gift, a makeshift dagger made from his old Mekark exosuit.
I hope you never have to use it.
Gabanyi thanked him and told Chiron to seek guidance from a blind woman at a Dowser sanctuary. Chiron raised an eyebrow as he agreed. They shook hands, hoping to cross paths again. Gabanyi had heard the accusations along his route before he reached the settlement. A male autumn dragon had been blamed for destroying livestock, and the villagers were growing restless. They spoke of scorched fields and missing animals, their fear giving way to anger. But Gabanyi knew dragons well enough to recognize that this didn't fit their behavior. His inclination was that the truth lay elsewhere. He followed the trail of destruction to its source, carefully studying the burnt grass and shattered bones. The marks didn't match the claws or breath of any dragon that he knew, but instead suggested something far more cruel. Eventually, his search led him to the true culprit. A mutated wildcat, its body bloated with spores and its eyes glowing an unnatural green. The creature had been hunting under the cover of a dragon's presence. It proved to be a clever and deadly predator. He confronted the beast in a grove on the outskirts of a village. The fight was swift but brutal, the wildcat lunging with spore-covered claws. Gabanyi used his blade and a vile dragon fire to end the creature's rampage, ensuring it couldn't harm anyone or anything ever again. When he returned to the settlement with proof of the wildcat's existence, the villagers were both relieved and ashamed. They had been ready to blame an innocent dragon for their troubles, their fear nearly leading to tragedy. Gabanyi spoke to them of the importance of understanding and coexistence, his words carrying the weight of his bond with the dragons. The male autumn dragon, as if sensing the shift in the villagers' attitudes, appeared at the edge of the settlement the next day. He was still wary of the villagers, so they met in the shade of the trees on the edge of town. He approached Gabanyi, and his golden eyes filled with gratitude. From beneath his wing, the dragon presented a gift. A single scale. Light as air, but strong enough to deflect steel. He accepted it with reverence, knowing it was a token of trust and appreciation. Rumors of abandoned nests and mecharch traps had drawn him to the jagged entrance carved into the side of the mountain. He approached the dragon's lair with cautious steps, hoping to possibly recover a dragon egg that might have been left behind. The air inside was stale and cold, carrying the faint metallic tang of machinery long since silenced. The deeper Gabanyi ventured, the more desolation he uncovered. Shattered eggshells lay scattered across the ground. The remains of protective alcoves had been destroyed. The stones were charred and cracked. Every corner of the lair spoke of abandonment and loss, a sanctuary desecrated by greed and war. It had become clear that any eggs that had once been here were long gone. His heart sank as he took in the scene. Each trap he disarmed, making his way through the network of caves, was another reminder of the mecharch's cruelty. Thin wires stretched across pathways, and pressure plates lay hidden beneath the rubble. Though the lair had been empty for years, its deadly defenses remained active, ready to maim any intruder. As he moved further, a misstep triggered a concealed mechanism. A volley of darts erupted from the walls, forcing Gabanyi to dive for cover. One of them grazed his arm, leaving a stinging wound. Gritting his teeth, he pressed on, refusing to leave without a final, thorough search. At the heart of the lair, Gabanyi found no miraculous discovery, only further evidence of destruction. A nest, now barren and overgrown with moss, rested beneath a fractured arch. The faint scorch marks on the wall told the story of the battle that had unfolded here. The realization that he had arrived far too late weighed heavily on him. He documented the location and details of the lair, ensuring it would be remembered by the Dowsers. As he navigated his way back out, battered and bloodied, he wondered if someday, after the Dowsers cleared away, a dragon could reclaim this lair and raise a family here. The river's current churned dark and cold as Gabanyi stepped carefully across the rocks that bridged the treacherous waters. His progress was slow but steady until his footing slipped on a slick algae-covered stone. In an instant, he plunged into the icy depths, and the frigid water swallowed him whole. The current pulled him with relentless force, spinning him in every direction, slamming him against rocks. Gabanyi fought to the surface, his arms flailing against the numbing cold. When his head finally broke through, he gasped for air, his lungs burning as the river carried him further downstream. He managed to grab a hold of driftwood, clinging to it with what little strength he had left. The world around him blurred and closed in as the cold seeped into his bones, and the thought of a long, deep sleep seemed like an appealing option. When the river finally spat him out on a muddy bank, he collapsed, too exhausted to move. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his body trembling violently as fever began to set in. The combination of cold water and his injuries from earlier ventures had taken its toll. He needed warmth and shelter. Fast. Summoning his remaining strength, Gabanyi crawled towards the nearby forest, the trees offering a protective canopy against the wind. After what felt like hours, he found a hollow beneath the roots of a massive tree. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Gathering dry leaves and twigs with shaking hands, he managed to spark a small fire, and its flickering flames were a lifeline against the encroaching darkness. From his pack, he retrieved the herbal tonic given to him by the winter dragon. He drank it in slow, measured sips, and felt warmth spreading through his chest as the bitter liquid worked to stabilize his fever. He wrapped himself in his cloak, pressing closer to the fire as he fought to stay awake. That night was long and merciless, and the fever gripped him in waves. But by morning, the fire had burned low, and his strength began to return. He picked himself up and continued on his way. Gabanyi woke to the sound of boots pounding against the wooden floors of the small rural house that he'd been offered shelter for the night. The sharp creak of the door being thrown open startled him fully awake. He sat up quickly, his heart pounding as he realized the voices outside belonged to Mekark soldiers. The family that had hosted him, a kind farmer, his wife, and their young daughter, had insisted he take the room furthest from the entrance. Now their voices could be heard pleading with the soldiers. Gabanyi's pulse quickened as he thought of his dowsing gear, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under his cot. If discovered, it would spell disaster not just for him, but for the family harboring him. He dropped to his knees, pulling up the floorboard to retrieve the pack. As the heavy boots grew closer and louder, Gabanyi carefully secured the gear and slipped towards the small window at the back of the room. Through a crack in the door, he saw the soldiers tearing apart the modest home, flipping tables and scattering belongings in their search for contraband. The farmer tried to reason with them, but the soldiers' sharp orders silenced him. Gabanyi pushed the window open just wide enough to slip through, wincing as it creaked. He landed softly on the damp earth outside and quickly pressed himself against the wall. The night air was cold, carrying the faint smell of smoke. His breath came in quiet bursts as he listened to the soldiers ransacking the house. He crept towards the edge of the property, pausing only when he reached the barn. From here, he could see the soldiers dragging the farmer and his wife outside. The little girl clung to her mother's skirt, her tearful pleas cutting through the stillness of the night. With a heavy heart, he slipped into the shadows of the surrounding forest, his pack secured on his back. The Mekarks would take what little they could from the family, but Gabanyi had managed to escape with his dowsing gear intact. He vowed to repay the kindness shown to him when his mission was complete and to help rebuild what the soldiers had destroyed. Nestled in a small clearing, a natural spring bubbled up from the earth, its crystal clear water reflecting the sunlight that filtered through the canopy above. Surrounding the spring were intricately carved stone pillars, their surfaces etched with the images of dragons in flight, coiled around trees and nurturing their young. The carvings were arcane works of art, with each detail painstakingly rendered as though the artist had witnessed the dragons themselves. Gabanyi traced his fingers over the stones, feeling the smooth grooves in the carvings. The spring seemed to hum with a quiet energy as well. He filled his canteens, marveling at the purity of the spring's gift. The carvings told a story. One pillar depicted a great battle, with dragons rising against shadowy figures armed with strange devices. Another showed dragons guiding humans through the wilderness, their wings shielding them from storms. But it was the third carving that caused Gabanyi to freeze in his tracks. It looked as if someone had tried to deface the carving, but it was clearly a depiction of a lone dragon egg resting within the fiery embrace of a volcanic caldera. The flames licked at the edges of the egg, but it remained unscathed, radiating a soft, protective glow. Gabanyi knelt by the water's edge, his gaze lingering on the image of the caldera. It felt significant, as though the carving was pointing him towards something yet to come. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than an artistic flourish, that this was a clue, a piece of guidance left behind by those who understood the dragon's true power. He cupped the water in his hands and drank deeply, letting its clarity wash away the fatigue of his journey. As he sat back and gazed at the carvings once again, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whoever had built this place, however long ago, had left behind a legacy not only of artistry, but of hope, and more importantly for him, direction. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Gabanyi knew he couldn't linger. The image of the egg in the caldera stayed with him as the glow of the water faded behind him. With his canteens full and his spirit renewed, he set off once more. As always, he heard the first rumor while passing through a quiet riverside village. As he traded for supplies, an elder woman told him of a young autumn dragon that had been separated from its family. The story came with little detail, only that the dragon had last been seen near the dense ambercliff forest, moving cautiously as though avoiding detection. The idea of a lone dragon, so vulnerable, filled Gabanyi with urgency. He pressed for more information but found few who knew anything beyond whispers. The villagers, wary of Mech-Arch patrols and spies, seemed hesitant to speak openly. Still, the elder pointed him towards the outskirts of the forest, warning him of the dangers that lurked within. The journey to Ambercliff Forest tested his endurance. The terrain shifted from rolling meadows to tangled undergrowth. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp soil. Gabanyi moved with care, his steps measured as he followed the faint trail left by the dragon. Claw marks scored on the bark of a tree, and tufts of shimmering scales occasionally caught the light between the roots. Deeper into the forest, the signs grew fresher. Broken branches and disturbed foliage suggested the dragon was close. He also encountered evidence of Mech-Arch activity. Burned clearings and discarded mechanical parts hinted at recent patrols. His hand hovered near his blade, prepared for an ambush at any moment. Finally, he found the young dragon. It was nestled in a shallow den beneath a fallen tree. Its scales were amber and glowed faintly in the fading light. When the dragon's eyes met his, they were wide and wary, but it didn't flee. Instead, it watched him cautiously, its body tense but unthreatening. He knelt slowly, offering a piece of dried fruit from his pack. The dragon sniffed the air, hesitating before creeping closer to accept the offering. It devoured the fruit quickly, Its hunger was very apparent. He spoke softly, and his voice was calm and reassuring as he promised the creature's safety. The young dragon needed to be reunited with its family, or, failing that, brought to a Dowser sanctuary where it could grow and thrive. As they set off together to the nearest Dowser way station, the force seemed to close around him, but he felt a flicker of hope. This is why he fought, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The road to the next settlement was uneventful until Gabanyi began hearing muttered conversations among the traders at a roadside market. It didn't take long to piece together the source of the whispers. Someone had been spreading rumors about him. A rival Dowser, Saren, had made her presence known, weaving tales about his supposed betrayals and failures. Gabanyi gritted his teeth as he listened to the traders recount Saren's accusations. She had claimed he was reckless, that his methods endangered the dragons and those who supported him. Worse, she insinuated that his actions had led to the death of hatchlings. The very idea of that made his blood boil. It was no wonder the traders were hesitant to deal with him. Saren's lies had struck at the heart of his very reputation. He knew Saren's motivations well enough. Once they had worked together, their shared goal of protecting dragons and uniting them against the Mecharchs. But their approaches had diverged. Gabanyi's willingness to take risks, to step into danger for the sake of the mission, had clashed with Saren's more cautious and calculated strategies. What had once been a difference in method had grown into an unbridgeable rift. Gabanyi's mind raced as he tried to decide how to address the situation. Confronting Saren directly would risk escalating their feud, but ignoring her slander would allow her lies to fester. He chose a middle path, resolving to prove his worth through his actions rather than words. After overhearing the rumors, he approached the traders in question and he reassured them of his dedication. I can't change what Saren says, but I can show you the truth through my actions. If you've heard stories, ask yourself this: have my efforts ever endangered you or your family? Some of the traders softened, nodding reluctantly. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a start. Gabanyi left the market with fewer supplies than he had hoped for, but his resolve was stronger than ever. Saren's vendetta might slow him down, but it wouldn't stop him. As he walked away, he thought of the dragons he'd saved, the hatchlings he had nurtured, and the bonds he had forged. Saren could spread all the rumors she wanted, but the truth of his mission would shine brighter than her lies. His path was clear, and he would walk it with unwavering determination. The air around the volcano was suffocating, thick with the acrid scent of sulfur and the weight of heat radiating from the earth. Gabanyi's breaths came shallow and labored as he climbed the craggy slope, the ground beneath him trembling with distant rumbles. The obsidian egg he sought was rumored to lie within the heart of the caldera, its survival a miracle amidst the molten chaos. The heat began to sap his strength, and the sharp rocks cut through his well-worn boots, biting into his now bleeding feet. Gabanyi clutched his dowsing crystal tightly, its faint glow guiding him onward. The memory of the carving at the spring filled his mind. Its depiction of the egg in the volcanic embrace propelled him forward despite everything. When he reached the caldera's edge, the sight below took his breath. Rivers of molten lava flowed in slow, destructive patterns, their glow illuminating the cavernous interior. At the center, perched on a narrow island of blackened stone, was the egg, and next to it, the bones of a colossal ancient dragon. The egg's surface shimmered like polished glass, hues of red and gold dancing across its obsidian shell, as though capturing the very essence of the volcano's fire. The ground shook again and nearly threw him into a lava pool. The volcano's activity was increasing, and every moment spent here heightened the risk. He scanned the edge for a path and found a precarious trail leading down. The descent was harrowing. Loose rocks gave way beneath his weight, and the air grew hotter with every step. When he finally reached the island, his body was trembling from exertion. He approached the egg, his hands hovering over its surface before he dared to touch it. The warmth that radiated was soothing. It was a contrast to the oppressive heat around him. Carefully, he wrapped it in a protective cloth he had carried for this very moment, securing it in his pack. The climb back was equally treacherous, as if it was protesting the theft of the egg. The ground continued to quake beneath him more frequently, and the roar of the volcano grew louder, but he was unshakable. With every ounce of strength he had left, he pulled himself over the caldera's edge and began his descent down the volcano. When he finally reached the safety of the surrounding forest, he collapsed, the egg still cradled securely in his pack. Exhaustion threatened to overtake him, but he felt something new. Relief. The obsidian dragon's last hope was safe. Gabanyi allowed himself a moment to breathe, knowing the road ahead would be no easier than the road here. But for now, he had won a victory. For the dragons, for the Dowsers, and for the very future of Prelar. I had started to hear about Dragon Dowser through various blogs and newsletters in the solo TTRPG community. I know that it had won several awards for the actual design of it. And I will say this, if you can pick up a physical copy, I am a little jealous because I played through the PDF version, and just seeing the art that was put into this is fantastic. And it is, at the core of it, it is a straight up Carta game, like any other thing. Like last season, Polter, very much the same thing that this one was. But the world that's built out for this and your place in it as a character is something that is very appealing, I think. One of the other things that occurred to me when I was reading through the relationship between this natural resource that is essentially the dragons and the mechanical kind of regime that is in charge of the planet, the first thing that kind of came to my mind was the whaling industry in the 19th century and how it was essentially creating a resource that spawned technology to go forward, but it was at the cost of, I guess, majestic creatures, to kind of use the analogy there. And that was really compelling. And as I played through the game, that was still kind of hanging over my head, thinking about the whaling industry back in the day and the natural parallels that were happening here. So it definitely developed into a very compelling story. Thank you again for listening to Your Story Will Be Different. We're about halfway through this season 2. For our next session, we're going to be playing The Magus, which is similar in tone to 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, where you are a newly forged magus trying to find your place in the world, but a lot of your power comes at the cost of sacrifice. As always, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Dragon Dowser by Hatchlings Games. Be sure to check it out for yourself and see what your adventure saving dragon eggs in this mystical world is like. But just remember, your story will be different.